Ladies and gents, welcome to Recasting Culture. This is the first episode of this slightly new rebranded podcast that it was from previously. And why you may be wondering why I have this podcast and what the purpose of this podcast is. And really, that's a good question. And that's something that I'm hoping to try and figure out by the end of today too, because I kind of have an idea, but I guess I think the best way for me as an extrovert to kind of process things is out loud. And so what I've actually done today is hoping to let you know a bit more about myself and also let you to know what's going on in my head and my processes about things. I actually forced my fiance, who is very kindly joined this call, to come and sit down and like try and force me to figure out why I'm doing what I'm doing and to really just figure it out together. Actually, by the time this releases, hopefully she'll be my wife by that point. And so we'll see what that looks like. I actually feel sorry for her more than anything else. But anyway, the point being, I forced her along with me. So hopefully we can kind of figure out where and why we agreed to do this, because obviously I did this after talking to her too. And yeah, so without much further ado, Cheyenne, welcome. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. I don't know if you want to say anything about yourself, but if not, we can dive right into.
I guess I'll say a little something just for context, but yeah, this is really the Aibel show. I'm happy to leave most of the talking to you, but like Aibel said, I'm Cheyenne, currently fiance, also hopefully wife by the time this airs, unless something crazy happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to be here. This is my first time on a podcast, so we'll see how this goes. As Abel said, he is an external processor, so I'm really hoping that he's gonna carry this for us, and I'll be here to prompt things. So yeah.
No, I think you'll be fine. I was telling her yesterday that she was mentioning that this is the first time on a podcast, and I was like, well, okay, but all the things that you're about to do now is the exact same things you do for basically your living, basically in every time you meet someone, and the amount of empathy that you have. So I have no doubts that this is going to go well. But saying that, you're up. Like, I don't know if you have a question. I really didn't give you much prep for this whatsoever. I really just kind
That's
of gave it
okay.
to you and said, off you go. So off you go.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, maybe just like tell the people like a little about yourself. Like, what's kind of been your journey of life? Where are you from? How'd you get to where you are now?
Sure. Okay. Fair
In a
question.
few words, you
In a
know?
few words. So, actually, the day that we are recording this is actually my 25th birthday. I'm not going to say what that date is
Woo!
because it might be, I don't want to be too egotistical. But nevertheless, it is actually my 25th birthday. Yeah, 25 years is a long time. Not really. Like, objectively, it's not. But, like, for me, it's been 25 years. It's been a while.
Your whole life.
Exactly. It's been my whole life. I don't know. I get here. This is a harder question than I expected it to be. I know. You think
I
it'll
should
be
have given
easy
you
to
a
talk about.
softball
Yeah, you
first.
probably should have
Yeah.
stopped it. Yeah. Um.
Maybe do you want to start with like where you are now? Like,
Yeah. Well, no. I'll answer the first question. I think I've got it.
okay,
Okay.
all right.
So I think the way. When people ask me this question, typically I go down this whole life journey of like, I was born in India. I grew up there till I was 2. I moved to the UK. I lived 20 years of my life there. And, those were kind of my formative years. And, I grew up in a household where Catholicism was important. My parents, that was their tradition. We went to mass every Sunday. There was no question about it. If you didn't go to mass, you were in trouble. Like, I remember those times where I used to fake getting out of mass. And the rule was, well, if you're sick enough to not go to mass, you're sick enough to stay in bed for the rest of the day. And so you very quickly you learn on, like, this is not a good trade. Just go to mass. It's not worth it. And then there's also like, I was always like an overachiever in some sense. And like, so when I wanted to do something, I wanted to do it nearly perfectly. And so when after my first communion, my parents said, go altar serve, I was like, I will be the greatest altar server known to mankind. And so like, I was doing things and like learning things and I was good at what I did. But during all of this, Catholicism was just one of those things that you did. It wasn't one of those things that I lived by per se. And I think that really changed with the introduction of my brother. It's not like he was born after me. My brother's 8 years older than me. But his was an example that I really cared about because he always looked after me from a young age. I remember those times when like my parents aren't in the house and he's sitting there helping me do my homework. There's times when I remember like I was crying my eyes out because I wanted to go watch the new James Bond film and he was going with his friends who he's like 16, 17 and I'm like 9. And like he took me with him with his friends and like he was a very important character in my life. And he took his faith seriously like overnight one day. And I'm not going to go too much into that because I'm sure it'll come out through the rest of the episodes. So hopefully that I record at some point. But he changed his life immensely. And in that example, I saw someone who took what was a tradition in our lives for a long time seriously and embodied it. And I saw a radical disposition of joy, a radical disposition of like happiness, and a radical disposition of like trust in God. And I was like, okay, this is he's either lost the plot or like this is something I really want to take seriously. And I tried, like I went, I remember going to retreats and like, I felt like I saw some things and like, I think I did. I think the Lord appeared himself to me in many different ways, like in adoration and confession and like prayer and all of these things. But I think I was always just a bit too cynical and I was a bit too in my head about things. And so I never really trusted that completely. Um, but I think my intellect was one of those things I somewhat relied on. And so reading and listening and watching podcasts and watching interviews, I think why I have such an affinity for podcasts and media such as this is that that's kind of where a lot of my faith life developed from. Like I have a lot to thank like for Trent Horn or like Pints of Aquinas or those podcasts. They really did form me like pretty significantly. And in the midst of this, my mom, who has been, I can't believe I said mom, my mum,
So
who has been
American.
I know I have become so American. This is what you've done to me.
I'm so
Uh,
sorry.
um, yeah, my mum has always been a rock solid example of someone who just trusts in the Lord. Slightly emotional at times, but I apologize, mother, if you hear that me say that. But like as a whole, like a phenomenal human being who was very generous. And even my dad, who was, he had his struggles and he's like come on the other side of those now, and I'm very grateful for that. Was a man who, if nothing else, was like a stable presence. He was there, always has deficiencies, and so does every human being, but he was there and he cared, especially about me in a unique way. And I'm very grateful for that too. But in the midst of all this, when my brother changed his life, I said, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. And my faith and my reading and like led me to this point where I take it seriously, to the point where I was really convinced of like one of those, I think it's Blaise Pascal who said it, right? He was like, no, I think it was C.S. Lewis. Nope, it was one of those human beings who are very important, you should read. But whoever it was, they said like, faith is either of utmost importance or is of no importance. There's no median importance in this. Like God is either real or he's not. And if he's real, this is the most important thing in your life. And I was convinced he was real. And so if that was the case, then I should live my life according to it being the most important thing. And so I changed my degree. I was going to go to law school. I changed that to taking a theology degree. I've always wanted to come to the States because my brother also moved to the States. And so when I got into the program called ECHO at the University of Notre Dame, that's kind of how it got me over here. And eventually, obviously, I met you, which was always great. Getting married is always fun.
I guess we'll
But
find out.
yeah, yeah. Well, we don't know yet. But assuming that it's going to be good, yeah, it led me to here. But I guess the reason this podcast started, for this long-winded answer of my entire life, I guess I kind of reason why this podcast was, as part of my ECHO Masters, I did a podcast on masculinity, and I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed talking through things. And I also have this affinity, because I said, of things that formated me in my own life, to kind of offer at least a perspective of someone who is a young Catholic struggling through a culture where it's not as fun to be Catholic as it could be. And that's maybe not the most eloquent way of putting it. The more eloquent way is like, I think is Dr. John Cavadini. I think he was quoting someone, well, maybe not, maybe it was him, because he's pretty smart, so maybe it was him. He said, like, we could, like, it is, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but his desire was to create a society where it was easier to be a saint than it was to be a sinner. A society where it's easier to choose good rather than to choose evil. And I think that society is real and it's plausible. Now, it's not heaven. I'm never going to say everything will be perfect, but I will say we could reorient society in a way and culture in a way where, like, our children, like our children's children and children coming up, could have lives that are easier and more oriented towards virtue. And I think we can do that. And I think the only way we can do that is by recognizing what's wrong, changing it, and kind of what this podcast is called, recasting it, like fixing that mold in which the culture is currently casted and recast it into something new. And I'm hoping to have people on here who know way more than I do by magnitudes, who can help me process it, and hopefully those listening process it with me too.
I think the where you were quoting from Dr. Cavadini, I think is a Dorothy Day quote, which he's big
Sounds right.
into Dorothy Day. So I think, yeah, creating a society in which it's easy to be good, or a culture in which it's easier to be good. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is like the perfect project for you? I mean, one, yeah, as you said at the beginning, you're an external processor. You love to talk, which is great. You're also a great like listener, and those two things, need to go together, which is great. Yeah, but I think that this is it's a thing that you have struggled with, and it's something that I think a lot of people are wondering, especially young people, like how do I function in this uh, post-Christian society, where there, yeah, is a lot of pushback to, some of these values. And I think also like, what are these values? Like, let's not, we don't want to talk about it in these sort of abstract ways. I think as you were talking about in your sort of life story, all these people in your life who have shaped you into the person that you are, all of the media, like the retreats, all these things,
Hmm.
I mean, just shows how incarnational our faith is. Like we have to have these experiences that, yeah, that make us realize that this is real. I mean, great that if we can get there, like through our intellect. And I know that was a big part of your own conversion.
Hmm.
And even now, like your spirituality is, I mean, you have a master's in theology. Like clearly you care about like the intellectual side of it. But it's also about how are we able to live this out in our lives? And we have to figure out how to do that. How do we do that? By talking to other people, of
Hmm.
course, with prayer and, mass and these like spiritual experiences. And I don't mean to like separate those and to be like, okay, the spiritual stuff over here and the like lived experience over here. That's like the opposite of what I'm of like the
Hmm.
point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think this is a good project that attempts to, yeah, bring those two things together. You're a man of prayer, and the people who you are bringing on to this podcast, like, yes, are experts in some, way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
But I know that you also care about these people as being like models of faith in sort of like more ways than
Hmm.
just the intellectual. So I think this is a really helpful like medium for people to experience. Um, yeah, sort of like the combination of the incarnational nature of the faith and how we do that now in this time. Um, yeah, I maybe off of that, like what is it about this current moment? Like what is the culture that we're currently living in? The title of your podcast, as you were saying, is Recasting Culture. And it's not a matter of like scrapping everything that has happened. But yeah, like where are we now? What exactly is it that you're trying to recast? Maybe what things are we keeping? And
Hmm.
what things are we trying to improve?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I want to comment on something you did say earlier for a second there before I come back to that. Um, yeah, our faith is inherently incarnational. It's real, it's tangible, it has to be something that's experienced. And I think relationships are a significant part of that. And I think it's only in forming relationships with one another that's actually genuine change that takes place. Like I learned and gleaned and a lot of information and had a lot of like intellectual formation through my podcast and my experiences. And those things were great and very essential. But like in Echo when I was in a placement for 2 years and I was living with two people for 2 years. Like that is the one of the most informative things that you can do in your life because it's tangible. It forces you to change things. It forces you to. So while this podcast I hope is helpful and like beneficial, like it can never take the place of like genuine human formation, genuine relational formation. And that's because you're right. Like our faith is so inherently incarnational. It's like prayer is the foundation on which everything else built upon. And everything that built upon. Like the very top part maybe is what you're doing on the side to keep reading and um, understanding, but a significant part of it is just really what we've been talking about a lot recently is like that trust in God and knowing that He's going to do what is good for you and knowing that He's going to complete the good work that He started in you. And that's a line I've stole from Matt Fradd, who I'm sure stole from somewhere else. But like trust in that, and then that human relationship that exists with the people around us. Now, when it comes to what are we keeping this culture and what are we trying to talk about? Well, I think not to sound radical in some sense, but why not? Basically, everything Catholic is worth keeping. Like that's like the legitimate answer. Like there is like when I go on Kairos retreats. So like, part of what I used to do and what I do now is like lead retreats, and especially Kairos retreats. And there's this part in that retreat where like I stand up and I talk about the first principle of Ignatius of Loyola. But that's how it's laid out in this Kairos booklet. And the first principle is to love God above all else so that he can put into order everything underneath. So like your love for your family, love for your friends, love for your sports teams, love for food, like there's desires and wants that you have, he puts them in, like, so when you put God as the proper place where he should be, which is the highest, it can help you put everything else into perspective. And I guess what culture has got wrong in some real sense is that it's chose to count God as one among other equal things. Um, and when it's one among other equal things, it has to convey and fight for the attention of the other things. Um, whereas, like when you consider God to be this transcendent thing, so this thing is so like so beyond everything else on this earth, and yet so inherently personal to us, then when we put that first, it's so much easier to put into context all the other things in our life. Like I'm thinking about parents who, um, I'm not just picking up parents, but this is just an easy example that comes to mind when like parents who are so in love with their kids and care so deeply about their children that they sometimes forget to put like their spouse in some sense like a real priority above their child because they're so enamored and it's not a fault of um like in our hearts it feels like we are loving our kids so much that we are like that's why it's secondary, but the reality actually, this was in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce. There's a part where he talks to a mother who's so not he's not. Well, the character is talking to the mother who's on the precipice of heaven, and all she has to do is just accept that she like was like a helicopter parent in some sense, and was like too focused on the son, and like put all of her desires on her son, and like made everyone else's life miserable in the pursuit of her son. And she's like, I love my son so much. How could a just God like do this to me? Like, how could a just God tell me that I shouldn't love my son so much? And there's a line in there, something to the along the lines of, the problem was that you loved your son too little. Um, you loved your son as an object to be loved, and like as that is your highest virtue, instead of the person that's in front of you, um, whose ultimate order and whose ultimate good is to be with God and is to be in heaven. And I think what society has done has put things that are objects and persons who are not capable of giving infinite love back as a desire of infinite love. And so, like a crazy example of that is the sports maniac whose entire life revolves around sports. And this is coming from a person who loves sports and who's addicted to sports in some real, maybe not so good sense. But it cannot be the ultimate desire. And this is coming from someone who like I love you very much and I care about you significantly. And it's sometimes it's very hard to like not put you on a pedestal and go, okay, this is my entire focus. But it's because I know that to love you well is to put you second in some degree, which is a weird phrase for today's society. Um, Imagine getting up at the altar in a marriage one day and going, I love you so much that you're second in my life. Like in today's culture, like what does that mean? What does it mean for that? Because they don't have that idea of ordering. Um, and so there's a lot of good things in culture, like sports are good, like games are good, technology improvements can be good things. But what we've forgotten is how to put things in right order. And so I guess the question is when we're sitting down these episodes and we're trying to talk through topics is how can we put them back where they're meant to be? And when they are put back where they're meant to be, what does it look like to live that out? Um, because I think the way that we live and the way that we interact with things form what we think of the things. Um, lex credendi, lex vivendi, right? The way what we believe informs what we work, but it's also like cognitive dissonance. This is one of the arguments I made when we were considering putting like school masses. Um, like we normally have, most schools have school masses in the gym or the field house, but we have a church next door. So one of the arguments I was making was like it makes sense where you are and how you interact with things physically. Um, like there's a cognitive dissonance for the kids who sit in the field house for the 99% of the time when they're sitting in a field house. It's at a sports game. It's loud. It's rambunctious. You're meant to be like sort of obnoxious and kind of like irritating the other team. And then for 1 hour every month out of nowhere, stop. Like this field house is now a sacred place where you are meant to be worshiping. It's a place where reverence and peace and quiet is important. It's hard for people to just switch that. Whereas a church, you have that in your head, you have this connection to this is something beautiful. This is something worth of respect. And I think the way that we live matters. And I think when we put things in right order, the way that we interact with things should change and does change slowly, but painfully, but nevertheless it will, I think.
I think you're right about this, like the ordering, and we need to reorder the things and have, sort of the God at the top of the pyramid, and then everything else kind of, we work out the rest, like based on that. I think it's, and I mean, I think this is probably like what you mean, and but correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I also think that it, like the word that's coming to mind is like worldview, and like how with God at the top, like because it's not like, okay, God is at the top and then like the rest of the stuff is nothing. In some
Mhm.
sense, like that's true, like relatively, but also like I think when we have God at the top of the pyramid, like, okay, God is like the most important thing, and my union with him is the most important thing. Absolutely true. But like that also, like that informs like how we like relate to all of these other people and things. So I think that's just sort of, yeah, like a distinction that I'd like to make. Like it's not that, you know, as you said, it's not that like sports are bad or like video
Mhm.
games are bad, but like actually, yeah, like with God at the top, it helps that like that should inform like the rest of, yeah, like what we're experiencing. So yes, it is an order of things, but also seeing it like seeing the rest of the world like through that lens of like God as the creator, like Christ as the
Mhm.
savior, you know, the Holy Spirit, as I started this without thinking what word I was going to use for Holy Spirit. You know, within us and animating, that's the word.
Sure. There we go.
And the Holy Spirit like animating our being. Um, and that means something
Mhm.
for everything else.
Yep.
Like you were saying, it's not just that like God is one thing among many things. God is like the ultimate, and everything else is in light of him. Um, yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
Like, is that what you are kind of saying?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think yes, it's not that everything else is less of importance because God is first. I think the correct way of maybe thinking about it in my head is that it frees you up to enjoy the things as they should be enjoyed when you have God as priority. I think it's true that every human being has an insatiable desire. Like we want something, and when we have the thing that we want, like it's not like we stop desiring for something. We just want something else. Like there's
Mm.
this insatiable desire within us, and we have this infinite desire within us. St. Augustine's classic line, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you," which is very fitting since we now have an Augustinian pope. So it just kind of all ties in together today. Um, yeah, like that's so true. Like our heart, we want infinite, and so when we put things that are finite in the place of the infinite, it will let us down. Like if I
Mhm.
put you in the place of the infinite, like as much as you're amazing, you're gonna let me down and you're gonna hurt me. In the same way, sure, and
Oh
vice
yeah.
versa too. Uh, but I do think that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Is like the ability to put God first is the ability to enjoy things as they should be enjoyed. Like you can go to a baseball game and see the Royals get blown out 12-0 or whatever it is. And it's embarrassing and it's painful and you're mad about it, but it doesn't determine your life. It doesn't weigh on you higher than it should. You can let that go. And because your infinite desire is still being satiated, your infinite desire is being met by someone who has the capacity to love you infinitely. Um, which sports cannot, which food cannot, which my spouse cannot, which my future children will not be able to do, which my parents cannot. They may all desire to do so in some way or another, but they cannot. And to expect that on them is to put a burden on them that they cannot fulfill, which then it becomes a burden on us that we have put this burden on them. Whereas when we understand that this is a desire of our heart, which is good and it's beautiful because we do desire to be loved and we do desire to be seen, um, and we can place that upon God, everything else in society and culture finds its place. And we can enjoy those things as good because it's clearly true that this marriage that we will hopefully be entering into is like one of the most important things in my life. But it cannot be the most important thing in my life because then the marriage itself suffers for it. Um, we sometimes think that if we put the thing that we care about so deeply on the front, we get to devote all our time and energy on it, and therefore it'll be better. Um, I- in some sense, that's true, but in a lot of sense, it's you're putting so much more pressure on this thing. And like when what's the straw that breaks the camel's back or whatever the phrase is, and when that thing happens, it devastates you because everything you have in your entire life has been dependent on this one thing. Whereas God, who cannot and will not let you down, who will always be with you in sufferings and in joys, cannot do that to you because it's not him. His entire being is ordered towards loving you. And I will say, I have forced Cheyenne onto this 30-minute conversation, and then I've spoken for 20 minutes of it. And so I don't know if you had any other questions last before we started to wrap up. But yes, thank you again for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I don't know that I had any other like specific questions. I think this has been a helpful back and forth. Hopefully this is helpful for your listeners to get more of a sense of like who you are and yeah, what you hope to accomplish with this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
Sure. Well, we have 4 minutes, so you have very limited time, so that's okay.
Great.
Um, if you were someone listening into this podcast, what would you want to talk about? What would you want to be heard about?
What would I want to hear about?
I would also like to say Cheyenne's not an extrovert, so I'm putting you on the spot, which is much more mean
Yeah,
than it's the other way
sorry.
around.
There might be a little more silence here because I'm an internal processor. Yeah, well, okay, what's something I would want to hear about? Um, I don't know. Maybe I'll try the external processor route. I mean, I like the overarching like goal of this podcast, which is like to make things practical, like to talk about how we practically in our culture like live out the faith because it is so incarnational. Um, I don't know. I mean, at this point in my life, like, when we're very close to getting married, like, yeah, I have a lot of questions about that. Like, how are we going to do this? Um, while at the same time, like, this podcast is not going to like solve all of those things. But like, yeah, I think it's helpful, to hear people talk about like their lived experience rooted in their lives of faith, like rooted in their relationship with God. Um, yeah, and I think that's where this podcast is going to hit is like, okay, yeah, it's not just this like intellectual pursuit. It's not just this like, okay, like how to have a good marriage. And like we never say God or Christ or like any of those things. Um, yeah, so I think like that's something, yeah, like that I hope is undergirding like all of this, but is also like said explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's sort of like a cop-out answer, but like it's so general. But honestly, like, I mean, I think part of the beauty of our church and our world is like the diversity, and people are coming at this with a lot of different experiences. And so I think there are so many ways that you could go about, like so many topics you could talk about, so many questions that people have, and you would probably never exhaust like all of the questions that that people um are wrestling with. This thing just came to mind, so this will be like maybe the last thing that I say. But I don't know. I remember like something that I experienced like in undergrad, and I think now I work with undergraduate students at Notre Dame, and I think it is still prevalent. There does still feel like a disunity or sort of like a maybe like two schools of thought almost around faith. Like you sort of have these two camps. Like one is like very maybe like traditionally prayerful, the daily mass goers, like you can find them in adoration and praying the rosary and um very very contemplative in that sense. And then you have this other camp that is very service oriented and um yeah, like loves to meet people on the margins,
Mm-hmm.
and think they're two really beautiful things. And I don't know if this is like an American thing or if this is, like a worldwide sort of phenomenon, but like I- both of those things are so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously we all have our own gifts and there are things that, um, attract, um, each of our hearts and they're all made differently and yet all, for the Lord. Um, but like how do we get these different groups to see the value in the others and to allow people who experience God in a different way than we do, um to let that inform our own image of God, I think, you know, sometimes in our culture, we can suffer from like too narrow a view of who God is. And so how do we continue to open ourselves to these other experiences, to other people, while at the same time like remaining rooted in the truths of the faith, but like
Hmm.
orthodoxy. Like Abel, I think you and I a couple of years ago read G.K. Chesterton's
Hmm.
Orthodoxy, and I love the image that he talks about in there of like of orthodoxy being like this sort of fence,
Hmm.
and it's really wide. Like it's a really, you know, it's a really big fence, and it's like all in here. Talk about all the things that you want. Like there's room, you know, for like discussion and disagreement. And then of course, you know, there's things that are outside of that. But it's not meant to be like exclusionary, like you were saying earlier.
Hmm.
Like it's meant to give us the freedom to talk about like how these things are different. You know, how people are different and how that actually images Christ in our brothers and sisters who are different from we are in, you know, uh, many different ways. Um, this is just a really large tangent, so I hope that this like makes sense to your
Yeah.
listeners. But I
No,
guess
yeah.
like yeah, I think that there are a lot of people that you could potentially reach with this. And I don't know. I hope that, you know, someday this podcast is big enough that you're, you know, getting questions from people like all over the world with different experiences of the church
Hmm.
and of the world and of God. Um, yeah, I think that's what this podcast is for, and I'm really excited for it.
Great. Yeah, I'm also excited. And, you know, what you're talking about, like inviting people on who have different experiences and different perspectives. You know, again, not to steal another Matt Fat quote, but I will. Like, you know, the beauty of the church is that we should expect orthodoxy where the church demands orthodoxy and sameness, but you should also allow diversity where the church allows it. And I think that's true. And I think it's hard because it requires you to give up your own character and your own personality at times. But nevertheless, self-sacrifice seems to be the way of the gospel more than anything else. So probably should embrace that more. Anyway, without all that being said, again, thank you so much, Cheyenne, for coming on and being my willing guinea pig for this first episode. Yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully, the plan is to start releasing episodes one episode a week, and then a slight mini episode a bit later in the weed. But yeah, I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to people we're sitting down with. We're going to be talking about dating and marriage pretty much straight off the gate. We're going to be talking about Catholic education, which I really care about, and there's loads of other topics that we've lined up that I'm looking forward to sitting down and talking to the expert about, but also with you guys about. And so I'm excited. And so with that, I hope you will join us in this journey. Cheyenne may not be on every episode, but she is hearing about it more than anyone else is. So she is also on this journey, regardless if she wants to or not. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be doing this with her, but I'm also excited to be doing with you guys. And so I hope to see you guys on the next episode, and I will talk to you then. Thank you, and God bless.